Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Profit Minds podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Kirch, creator of the Profit Minds Growth System, a unique blend of profit growth, productivity acceleration, and building robust business process for scale. In every episode, I interview entrepreneurs and small business owners from around the world with a unique story to tell. You can find the show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. Well, hi, everyone. Today, I welcome back as my guest, Steve Juetten, the founder of Bridgegate Partners and a business exit coach and strategist. This is a continuation of our conversation that we had a number of episodes ago. And today we're going to be talking about the profit arc for businesses, from inception to exit, and the different roles that profit plays in each part of a business's journey. Welcome back, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you, and I appreciate you having me back. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about this, the arc of profit and what it means at various points in time in the life cycle of a business?
Sure, and thanks, Steve. So this came about when you and I were chatting after the last call, and I mentioned to you that as a business owner, there's an arc of a business, and you so cleverly said, every business has a beginning and an end. Every business has to have an end, right? And the role of profit in that arc is different depending on where you are. So most businesses start here and they go up and then they go down. And the role of profit is different depending on the phases that you're in. And I divided it into kind of four sections or four parts of the life cycle of a business. But I also, when you and I were chatting, I mentioned to you that I'm surprised at how many business owners who are getting ready to exit their business don't really know how to define the word profit. And that's kind of curious because we all, if you survive for any time at all, you have profit. But many business owners don't really understand what that is. So I'm not an accountant. I don't even play one on TV. But I thought maybe you and I could start with talking about what we mean by profit. How would that be?
Sure. Yeah, let's start there. Neither of us are accountants, but I think both of us understand numbers. So you start obviously with a top line revenue, right? That's your gross revenue, and then you subtract from that what it costs you to make those sales, right? Whether it's a product that you're making or something else that like if you're contracting for a part of the service that you deliver. Something like that, right? Have I got it right there?
Yes, and I would divide expenses into two types. There's direct and indirect. And the direct sales are direct expenses are those that are related to the cost of producing the service or product for your customer. And it's really easy to think about those in terms of, does it directly relate to servicing your customer or your client? And then indirect expenses are expenses that you pay for things like maybe rent or utilities or something like that. But both of those are expenses that you subtract from revenue to come up with what you and I call net profit or net income, and that's the number that you need to focus on. But it's easy to get confused in all of that, because when you're talking to a business owner, I say to them, what is your net profit? And I get this curious look. But that net profit is, you're exactly right, Steve. It's the revenue minus your direct and indirect expenses.
Right. And I think it's important to understand, some people talk about gross profit versus net profit, right? And the gross profit is what you get after you subtract those direct expenses. Right. And the reason that that's a different number is because for every dollar of incremental sales that you make, you should earn a gross profit margin on those, which will stay roughly constant as your sales increase. Your indirect expenses, on the other hand, stay relatively flat for, let's say a given size business until you have to get to a bigger warehouse, or you have to have a bigger office space, or you hire additional full-time staff that aren't directly servicing your clients, right? So those indirect expenses are often called fixed costs. But both of those things have to be subtracted to get to your bottom line. And it's called the bottom line because when you get to the bottom of the ledger, that's the last line. Those are your net profits.
Correct. That's my understanding. And you gave two really good examples for indirect expenses, which stay fixed. One of them would be rent. Like I pay $1,500 a month for my office space, no matter how much money I make, no matter how much my revenue is, right? And it's the same thing when you think about some of your other fixed expenses. I pay a certain amount for my cell phone, and it doesn't change depending on what happens with the revenue. So those fixed expenses are indirect expenses, but they both have to be subtracted from the revenue in order to really know what your net profit is. Now, that concept is important, and keep in mind that depending on how you're doing it, your net profit does not include your taxes as well. So even off of the net profit, you have to take the taxes that are going to be paid by the business. And so it gets, many business owners get confused by those terms, but I mostly want to talk about net profit from there. And the reason is that your taxes are dependent on the state you're in and the form of governance you have and everything else. But when I'm working with a client who's thinking about exiting, we're going to focus on the net profit. And one of the reasons is one of the things that you do, Steve, which is you can affect your net profit by how you do what it is that you do. Correct?
Oh, absolutely. That's a big part of what we do here at Profit Minds, is to help grow both the top and the bottom line. Sometimes by just increasing revenue, maybe through a different kind of marketing strategy or a more efficient way of running your operation. Or, we increase the bottom line by reducing the expenses, looking for efficiencies in operations in that regard as well. So yeah, that's absolutely true. And then I guess the other thing, Steve, right, is you derive the value of the business very often by looking at that sort of bottom line, that net profit number. Do you not?
Excellent. Yes. And I nice lead in. Thank you. So think of your business as somebody's going to buy it. They don't want to buy the revenue number. They want to buy the net profit number. And so that's why when you work with Steve, as an example, the focus is going to be on how do we improve that bottom line number. And Steve, can I just put you on the spot for a second real quick? Let's say that you're a service business and you want to increase your net profit. What would be the top three things that would come to your mind if I said to you, I have a client that wants to sell his business in 2 years. How can he increase his net profit? Obviously, I'd refer him to you, but just for the conversation you and I are having, what would you think that service business owner might be able to do to increase his net profit?
Well, so the first thing, the quickest way to increase the bottom line is to look for those efficiencies, both in the direct and indirect expenses. It doesn't take any time to stop paying for something that you're not using. So I recommend to my clients, the first thing that I do very often is I'll ask them to pull out the last, several months, if not the full year of credit card expenses, and go through there and really look carefully at all of the things that they're spending money on. And is that required to service your clients? So often we get caught up as entrepreneurs in this shiny object syndrome, right? Where we say, oh, that would be really cool. And I know so many people who are selling AI stuff right now that right, people are buying this AI stuff and then they don't have enough time to do it. Right. And so it sits, and it might be a monthly subscription. Well, if you're not actually using it, well, maybe you shouldn't spend the money on it. So looking at particularly fixed expenses, those indirect expenses that you're paying on a monthly or annual basis that are not really required to service your clients, right? That would be the first thing that I would jettison. Then the things that you're using that are used, you got to ask yourself, is that the most efficient way to do that? Could I find a less expensive alternative for that kind of service or product that I need to service my clients? So reducing expenses is the quickest way, because that money drops straight to the bottom line, as they say. All of those things that you're no longer subtracting from your revenue, right? And then, I would obviously, to grow revenue, there are a number of strategies that can be employed depending upon what you're doing now and what's working, right? Do you have a steady source of leads? Do you have a steady flow of prospects? And are you converting them at a good clip? But Steve, the thing that most business owners shy away from that really helps profitability is looking at raising prices.
Pricing strategy, yes.
A pricing strategy. And you do it not based on what your competition is doing, but do it based on the value that you provide to your customers. Because if you provide more value than your competition does, you should charge a higher price. There's something unique, and this is one of the things that I work with, something unique about what you do and how you do it that provides additional value. And it's why your clients come back to you again and again to buy over and over, or stay with you. In the case of a coach, they stay with you for a long time because you're providing value to them. Mm-hmm. And most business owners, they're really afraid to do that. But if you look at the numbers and you look at, again, we're talking about direct costs, and the profit margin that you get, if you raise your price just a little bit, all of those dollars wind up dropping to the bottom line. And you have to lose a much larger fraction of your clientele than you might think in order for you to actually make less money.
I know when I was running my financial advisory business, we would do projects for clients, like a retirement plan or something like that. And to echo what it is that you're saying, I remember this so clearly. We raised the fee to do that from X to Y, and it was a small increase. But I was surprised by the impact that had on our bottom line, because all of our other expenses basically stayed the same, right? All of our direct and indirect expenses stayed the same. And that flowed all the way to the bottom line. And I don't know this for sure, but we sure as heck didn't lose any clients, and we converted the same number because we followed our conversion rates and things like that. We're still converting at the same rate, but we were much more profitable as a result of that. And it was sort of a rookie mistake, or a not very experienced advisor mistake early in the career. We were probably 3 years into the business and we made that decision. And it was almost magical, right? It flowed all the way to the bottom right away. So I was delighted by that. Good example of that, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what happens when the profitability of we talked a little bit about the very beginning and the very end. What happens in that middle section, and how does somebody know when they're sort of turning the corner and they're going to be exiting, but what are some of the things that they should work on to make sure that those profits don't drop off as they're getting ready to exit the business?
Let me go back and just say that there are 4 phases, the way that I define them, and I'd be curious about your comments as well, of a business in the arc. So the first 1 to 3 years or something like that is what I call birth and survival, right? You've started the business and you have to survive. And all the profit that you have, all the net profit you have, probably gets turned right back into the business. You're not pulling much money out of it at all. You're just trying to survive. So that first 3 years is that birth and survival. And kind of every penny of profit is reinvested, not for the personal gain, but to ensure the business keeps going on. So then in years 4 through 7, it's when you grow and expand. You've proven concept. You can do the business, and during this next phase, about the next 3 or 4 years or something like that, it's kind of the profitability is the cornerstone for your strategic planning. Now you're not unsure that you're going to survive. That isn't the question anymore. I think we can survive, right? We're going to expand. And what I tell many of my clients is, if you are in that growth and expansion period, don't worry about anything else yet. Don't worry about exit. In some circumstances, we may need to. But those first 2 phases, that birth and survival and then growth and expansion, you're really trying to get the business going. What am I trying to say? You're trying to scale the business, right? And so something like the first 7 years or so, you're just trying to get going. And then after that, in years 8 to 15 or something like that, you're optimizing the business. And the role of profit there is to look for other opportunities, maybe to bring on other partners or hire new employees or do whatever you need to do. And it's really, profitability is not, you're not quite there yet. You're kind of at the peak. But profitability there is an opportunity for a business owner to really start thinking even more strategically. And this is a mistake that I have seen happen. When a business reaches that level of profitability, one of the things that owners do is they start taking money out of the business. They pay themselves a bigger salary. They might have some perks, company car, leasing a company car and having the business pay for it, golf club membership or something like that. And this is the danger zone, because the next phase, when you want to exit, you need to have all that money showing up as net profit and not being hidden in the business. So right about there, at about a year 8 to 15 is the caution period, in terms of, if you want to exit your business, if you want to sell it for the maximum amount, you have to be careful not to let those, what do I want to call them, indirect fixed expenses creep in. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And I can understand the danger, because, of course, a fair number of people get into this business, or being an entrepreneur or being a business owner, because they really want to enjoy that part of life. So how do you balance that, Steve? What is it? How do you draw the line and say, this is enough, this is too much? Where's the tipping point?
Yeah, I'd throw that back to you, and I would say you got to talk to your profit mind coach to figure that out.
Well, and we actually do some amount of benchmarking, right? Of this is the kind of business that you're in, and this is the kind of profitability that you have, given your revenue and business type. This is a healthy profit margin, and you should be okay to take, extra, if you're making a lot more than that on a profit margin basis, then you would be, I think, okay, and your exit strategy coach wouldn't chastise you too badly for taking some of those perks. You have to be careful not to take it to the point where you don't really have much in the way of profit, because the bottom line profit has to include what you pay yourself, right? You have to take that out as an indirect expense, right? That's not. So many small business owners, and I don't know if you've seen this, Steve, but so many small business owners, they pay themselves when they get to the profit point. Then they can decide whether or not they can pay themselves. And you really don't have a profitable business unless you're including your own salary, the value that you bring as the CEO, the business owner, the principal, whatever it is that you're, the managing partner, whatever it is, unless you include that salary in your indirect expenses, because you're not actually calculating the profit correctly.
Exactly right. And Oh, I'm forgetting at the moment. What's the profit book that you and I both like so much?
Profit First by
Profit
Michael
First,
Michalowicz.
right? And I think I read Profit First right about at the 10-year mark of my business, and it made such an impact. That single thought you had, which is you have to pay yourself, and that's part of those fixed expenses. Because up until then, I was basically taking money out when I could, right? And that's not really a good way to run a business. You're not really running a business that way. You're doing, I don't know, whatever else you're doing, but that makes all the sense in the world. I kind of go back to something you said. I'm curious. You said you do some benchmarking around profitability by businesses or by industries.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
And have you seen the profit margins changing much in the last 3 years for some of those benchmarks? Are we more profitable, less profitable, or where does that stand? I'm curious, particularly in the last, I don't know, the last year and a half or 18 months when interest rates have been so high. Have you seen much change or much evolution in the profit margins?
Steve, that's hard to say because the data that I have access to is pretty dated. So
Uh,
it's not like I can say, it's in the last 18 months, it's been different than it is in the last 5 years. And the data that I look at, the government data, is I can't answer that question.
that
I
makes
would,
sense. Let
yeah,
me just
I would think that profit, to some extent, in some businesses, obviously, profit margins are being squeezed by higher interest rates, um, and yet, I know that some of my clients are doing quite well with their profit margins.
and that makes sense. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm kind of curious about that. The businesses that I've been seeing as an exit strategy coach, it looks to me like the profit margins are declining, but I think that might be more because of the nature of when I get a client, right? I don't get a client during their go-go years. I get a client when they're starting to wind down. And this is
Mm,
one of the mistakes that business owners make, all right? Sometimes people say, well, when should I sell? And when should I sell my business? And the answer is you always want to sell during an accelerating time, right? You want to sell before your peak. If you try to sell after the peak, the numbers don't look good and the trend is in the wrong direction. So if there was one thing I could tell most business owners who want to exit is don't forget you have to keep running the business. And this is a time, let's say you're in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before you want to exit. That's the time when you want to focus on that on the net profit in my mind, because
yeah.
that's what a buyer wants to see. So it's important when you're in that exit phase, let's say the last 3 or 4 years, that you really focus on the net profit. And again, just to pitch it over to Steve, that's when you really need to be looking at your fixed expenses, your indirect expenses, and the top line revenue growth, so that bottom number, because that's the number that a buyer wants. A buyer is looking at that net profit. And we'll talk
Yeah.
about a couple of other things that you can do. But during that period of time, Steve, it seems to me that's the time when some business owners start to get a little lazy, to be honest with you. They start to sit back and maybe are not as vigorous about running the business. You know what I
Well,
mean? Does that make sense?
it does. And in terms of the psychology of somebody who, well, I've been doing this for such a long time, I'm tired, and they run out of energy maybe, or they're not as gung ho as they were when they were younger. I mean, I'm not aging, but some people do. So, but I think your point is a good one. And by the way, that's the time you want to engage with somebody like my guest, Steve Juetten, because he can help you lay out that strategy. It doesn't have to be executed next week. It's a strategy. It's going to be executed over years. We're not going to do this in the next 3 months,
Right,
um,
right,
unless you have to, right?
right.
That's different. But ideally, you would, while your business is growing and while you're feeling good about it, that's when you want to engage. You want to make sure you have a coach, just saying. And you want to make sure that you have somebody like Steve who can help you figure out what strategy you should follow to maximize the value of this business while it's still growing.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons, Steve, you and I get along so. But here's the interesting part about all of this is that there are 5 steps in selling a business. All right. The first one is goal setting. The second one is assessing. And that assessment part includes looking at all those key performance metrics around financials. And the third phase, the third step, is improvement. I've never run across a business before at all that that couldn't gain something from improvement, right? And I said this, I may have said this to you earlier. It's like a house, like you're selling your house. Nobody's house is ready to sell the day they invite a broker in, right? There are things that you could do, the things that you should do, and that's the point of the second step in the process that we go through, which is to assess what should you stop doing, start doing, and keep doing. And again, I'll say the value of a coach is for me to focus the owner and the coach on what the client wants to exit. These are the things we need to focus on. All right. And it's almost inevitably going to be that net profit number. I'll just tell you that right off top. You don't need to be innovating at that time. You need to be focusing on the net profit.
Right. Okay. So Steve, just a quick reminder for folks, if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, yes, of course. So you can go to the website, which is bridgegatepartners.com. You can send me an email at steve@bridgegatepartners.com. And I have a special report called The 5 Steps to Exiting a Business that you can get at simplebusinessexit.com. And Steve, I'll send you that info and you can put it in the show notes. But really, I love to talk to people that are exiting their business or want to exit their business. I love to talk to all business owners. And so a phone call is really easy to do as well. And you can find my number on the website. One of the things that I say to people is don't wait until what did you say, Steve? Till you're exhausted or worn out or can't do it anymore or whatever. That's too late. Try to get to me earlier than that.
That's great. And that concludes our show. Thanks again to my guest, Steve Juetten, the founder of Bridgegate Partners. I hope you learned something about the profitability life cycle of business. I know I did. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Profit Minds podcast. This is your host, Dr. Stephen Kirch. Please visit www.profitminds.net for other episodes or to contact me. Thank you for your positive feedback, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others. Thanks for listening. Have a grateful day.